Does research have any idea why some people develop PTSD after a traumatic event and why others don't? So does the research have any idea why? Yes. But there's not a simple single answer to that. So let me give you some of the research answers to that. A lot of it might have to do with sensitivity developed because of the lives that were lived by your great-grandparents. When we were doing the Human Genome Project, there was the man in charge of the pediatric genetic disorders, by a guy, his name is Marcus Pembry, Dr. Marcus Pembry. He and his group ran into a real kind of confusing conundrum, a real kind of, wow, what happened here? Because the old belief was that if you had these genetic markers, you would have this disease. And what they found is you could have the genetic marker, but it wasn't actually predictive of which disease you would have. And that we had people with a single allele damaged in the same place and having different diseases. And it really messed with them. And they spent over a decade and a lot of time researching this, trying to figure out what the answer is. And what they came up with is really kind of changed the field of genetics a lot in the last 15 years. And here's what they found, is that, yes, you will have a disease if you have this deficit, but which disease you have is largely based on your family history, going back 2 and 3 generations. So what does that mean? Things that happened to your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents that changed their biochemistry and changed the way their genetics are expressed can be affecting you, or if you have children, affecting your children. Well, as you might imagine, that did not make people very happy to hear. And a lot of people started doing research to prove him wrong, prove that that's a false idea. And now what we have is a lot of research that's been produced in the last 7 or 8 years that is kind of confirming that that's the case. You have big studies. There's one that has been ongoing in the Boston area, looking at a particular population that has higher than average, significantly higher than average blood sugar disorders. And the thing that they have in common is that the great-grandparents grew up for early part of their life in Northern Europe and Northern UK during the famines, and they were exposed to extreme deprivation of food and nutrition for a period of time before they immigrated to the United States. And that strain put on them is now showing in their offspring and in their progenitors. Well, that's not very good news, folks. That means you can have a child having symptoms because of stressors that happened in their grandparents or great-grandparents that may not have anything to do with you, but have everything to do with what happened to them. And you really can't change that. We don't have the technology at this point to even want to begin to try to manipulate that at a cellular level, but that's what you're dealing with. And so if you're dealing with a sensitivity to, reactivity, you might find that they're going to have a more propensity in some situations to be reactive to trauma than other situations. Let me give you another really easy example. In the early 1990s, when brain imagery technology was in its infancy, some of the people at McLean Hospital in Boston were doing research on brain imaging and making some predictions based on what they thought they would see when they did the brain scans. And one of those studies looked at primates, pregnant primates. And what they did is they provided a medium stress environment for these primates every day during their pregnancy. not all day long, but periodically throughout the day, they provided stressful moments. And then at the end, when those offspring were born to that stressed parent, what they found is that the amygdala system, that fight, flight, take control, the most primitive system you have in your body, the one that all kind of negative emotions are tied to, had greater mass and volume in the offspring than in comparison with the adult, and in comparison with the control group of offspring that were not born to parents that were stressed every day. Now, the real problem with it is in the studies that followed after, what they found was that change, that alteration of mass and weight in the amygdala system, or the paralimbic system was what they were looking at, which you could measure in a brain scan, was being handed down from generation to generation. And it got handed down several generations. So that's a problem. And we haven't thought of that as human beings. We don't want to look at that we need to create stability, and it needs to be handed down from generation to generation to generation. And we have such social system upheaval on a pretty regular basis, where, I can't think of a single family who hasn't had some serious trauma either with themselves, their parents, their grandparents, or their great-grandparents, and it's having an impact on people. So that's just one area of research that says, yes, you have a greater level of predicting PTSD in certain situations. There are lots of situations, a lot of different dynamics. So in order to really kind of have a good handle on that, you're going to need to look at a lot of research and be able to digest it.